Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my Doctor Who Series 13 or 2022 specials ranking. So I will be ranking all three of the Doctor Who specials that aired in 2022 as part of Series 13. And like the Series 4 and 7, or 2008 to 10 and 2013 specials, I shall be ranking these episodes separately to the main series, which is Series 13, aka Flux, which has its own ranking available now if you would like to check that out afterwards. So, this ranking is mainly for the last three episodes of the Jodie Whittaker era, and apart from the updated top 10 13th Doctor stories ranking that will follow, this is pretty much it for the last of the Doctor Who review rankings, bar a few additional ones I would like to do later down the line, like when I did my top 20 classic Who episodes ranking for the Retro channel. That was an extra one, for example. But out of the main ones, this is the penultimate, followed by the updated top 10 episodes of the 13th Doctor's era. So, without further ado, the episodes included as part of the Series 13 specials, the 2022 specials, are Eve of the Daleks, the 2022 New Year special, Legend of the Sea Devils, the 2022 Easter special, and The Power of the Doctor, the BBC Centenary special, which is also Jodie Whittaker's last story as the 13th Doctor, and, depending how you count Trial of a Time Lord and Flux, and if you count Sharda or not, is the 300th Doctor Who story. 300! Wow! It's a pretty great episode for that milestone. Not as good as Stones of Blood, but better than Planet of the Dead. But more on the Power of the Doctor when it gets to its spot on the ranking. But to begin the ranking, at number 3 is an extremely disappointing episode. When I reviewed this one, I pass it at 6 out of 10. That's passing the score, by the way. Terminology not, as in it's got a pass. But yeah, I've now lowered this down to 5 out of 10. I had given it 6 at the time, but it's now been lowered to 5. And that is Legend of the Sea Devils. The 2022 Easter special, and the inferior Easter special compared to its 2009 counterpart, Planet of the Dead, which I previously mentioned being the 200th story of the show, depending on how you count Trial of a Time Lord and Sharda. Planet of the Dead was a really fun Easter special. Legend of the Sea Devils is a very messy one. I'm not sure exactly what went wrong. There is a good story there. I can tell it is there. It's ready. It's waiting to burst. It's like that giant sea monster coming out of the sea. It wants to burst out from the sea, but there's an anchor attached at the bottom, and it's really, really heavy, and nothing's chewed through the metal. And I think the problem was they made it 50 minutes, or not even 50 minutes even, it's about 47. But they decided to cap it at the usual 13th Doctor episode length, roughly, as opposed to leaving it an extra 10 or so minutes to special length. The usual special length is 60 or more. And because of that, it feels like this episode isn't as special as the other episodes considered specials, which is a massive shame. The only really reason it's a special is because it's a one-off episode airing around at a certain point in the year, in this case Easter, but it's just a one-off standalone episode that usually, unless it's a two-parter like End of Time, they're usually standalone or three-parters like next year's 60th anniversary specials. Well, I say three parts, or there might be three connecting ones, but point is, unless it's a multi-parter or have very significant connections to another one, then they're usually like at certain points of the year and not really part of a couple weeks worth of episodes that form a series. Hence the whole mini-series for the ones following series 4 and 7, and these ones, and the ones this year actually preceding series 14, with the possible exception of the Christmas one. because that will be with the 15th Doctor, not the 14th. But we'll sort that out when we come to those in the future. But for whatever reason, Legend of the Sea Devils was cut to 50-minute episodes. But, well, not even that. But, fine. 50-minute episodes work well with the regular episodes of the series, but it certainly seems that there was enough to possibly fill another couple of minutes more, and it's been shoddily edited together. It's definitely one of the worst edited episodes of the show, with action sequences that are haphazardly cut. The pre-title sequence isn't too bad. It's actually quite fine. A little bit of dodgy CGI, but with a pre-Disney Plus budget, that's to be expected, especially in this really CGI-heavy era of the show. But once we get past that, there's some really shoddy scenes with the Sea Devil killing people, and then somehow the Doctor and her companions set a trap for it, and it just happens, and there's some really, really dodgy cuts and really dodgy moments. It just feels so awkward. These 3 episodes were 3 of the last ones to be filmed under pandemic restrictions, and it's quite noticeable with all 3 of these episodes and almost all of Flux. But this one is probably the most notable because it just looks so haphazardly put together. At least the other ones were more or less competent in putting themselves together, even if there was quite a lot of visual effects and it doesn't always look real. But on the plus side, there is at least some sort of competent editing in the structure of those episodes. In fact, in some of the episodes in Flux, they were an extra couple minutes longer to tell their story. The even number of episodes went from 50 to 55 or 60 minutes as opposed to the usual 50. And even if Legend of the Sea Devils was an original Series 13 planned story before they went the Flux route, it still could have been extended a bit longer. I don't know why the editing was so haphazard, but yeah, that is the main downside of this story. The story itself isn't quite as interesting or exciting either. Like I said, there's something wanting to get out of there, but the execution and some elements of what we got with the plotline don't quite work. Imagine Ching, for example, is easily one of the least compelling and least interesting historical figures of not just the Jodie Whittaker era, but of New Who, which is a real shame because there's potential for character growth and learning about this character really well, and under writers such as Mallory Blackman or I think it was Nina Mendoza. I think, or was that the director? Nikola Tesla's writer, or Maxine Alderton or Joy Wilkinson. We meet notable historical figures that written really well. Even Chibnall's done this before, co-writing Rosa and I guess unofficially Haunting Villa Diodati, writing War of the Sontarans featuring Mary Seacole, Spyfall Part 2. He's written really good historical figures as well. So I don't know exactly what's wrong with this historical figures writing, but she's the least compelling. And the Sea Devils, they're not outside of hating humans, they're not really that interesting. Nice updated design, although I think it would have been good if they had done the mouths like with the Jadoon, where they kind of did the remote controlled kind of mouths when they are talking. I mean, yeah, the masks when they were wearing them in the classic series didn't really match up to the vocals and the lip movement, but classic Who masks didn't really do that very well anyway. With the new series ones, they've got the technology to make them move closer to the words of the dialogue, like with the Jadoon, for example. So I'm not sure why they couldn't have done that for the Sea Devils. It just comes off as a bit disappointing, and the Sea Devils just kind of just want to take back the planet, so they cause global. They're trying to sink the world, global watery disaster through this technobabble thing. It's it could have been expanded a little bit better. And there's this random monster creature that turns up, does pretty much nothing, and then goes away again and disappears, and we don't know what happens there. It feels like there's elements of this story that are missing, basically, both on a visual and on a script level. And I don't know if another 10 minutes would have fixed that. I'm pretty sure it probably would have, actually. But yeah, it's just a bit of a disappointment. The strongest element is the Phasmin stuff, and also Dan reconnecting with Diane over the phone. Those are some pretty nice character moments there. And there is a couple of good visuals, like the under the ocean stuff, but overall it's kind of hampered by, I don't know if it was thanks to the COVID restrictions, but definitely the worst produced episode of the show for a good while, and in a CG heavy era, because I've had quite a bit of issues with the latest couple of episodes over the last few years for having so much CGI. I understand I understand the reason why they needed it for Fluxed, but it just felt the series getting very CG heavy in terms of locales and backgrounds, and I think it needs to be used a little bit more sparingly. But in terms of an episode execution overall, this one just feels like one of the worst of the revived series, just mainly due to the sloppy editing and the story just leaving out some stuff or getting to some stuff too quickly and just making it look so hokey and terrible. Another 5 to 10 minutes could have easily fixed most of these problems. Easily! My theory is maybe because this was supposed to be the last 13th Doctor episode. Yeah, what a good one to go out on, by the way. Maybe the last 10 minutes was dedicated to the Doctor regenerating and getting over that, and the whole Yaz stuff, which was handled well for the last couple minutes of Power of the Doctor. But yeah, so maybe the last 10 or at least 5 minutes would have been dedicated to that before Power was commissioned. If that was the case, then this episode was cut by 50 minutes and they didn't know what to do with the rest of the time frame, so they just left it as a usual episode length, which is a shame because you could have had more time to expand some points of the story or at least fix some of that terrible editing. And if this was how it was going to be for a standard 50-minute episode, then something had to have been cut before they put the episode out. But as it stands, it's a terrible kind of a botched middle ground of that. There are some good things in there. I did have some enjoyability, which is why it's still a 5 and not any lower. But it's definitely gone down in opinion, and on an execution level, it is one of the weaker ones of the revived series, which is a massive shame. I was so excited to see the Sea Devils again, and I was kind of let down, and it's only gotten lower since then. My only hopes is that if the Sea Devils do come back again, they are handled a little bit better, or at the very least given a better structured and edited episode. And also, if Ella Road and the co-writer of the episode and director Hola Wang are given another chance to write and direct for the show again, I hope they get that chance and they are allowed to make a stronger episode or episodes to show off that they are actually quite talented people, as opposed to whatever happened with this episode. This is a good one to have a documentary about the production problems of a particular episode. In fact, I'd actually watch one of the whole series, even the whole era, in fact. But yeah, or an extended version of the episode with some of these problems fixed and resolved. We probably won't get that until like 2060 or something, when they release the collection Season 39 box set. Oh well, at least it isn't Orphan 55 2, the even worse sequel to the original. Ugh. Moving on to Much Better Things number 2. The much, massive improvement following episodes to Legend of the Sea Devils. It is, of course, the BBC Centenary Special, The Power of the Doctor. Jodie Whittaker's final story as the 13th Doctor is easily my second favourite of the revived series after Chris Eccleston's phenomenal Battle from the Parting of the Ways, especially Parting of the Ways. That one is absolutely incredible. End of Time I do like, but I think Power is stronger than that one. And then Time of the Doctor I like more so as the end of Matt Smith's run, but it could have been better. And some of the elements introduced there could have been taken out. And Twice Upon a Time, just don't even get me fucking started on that terrible train wreck. But this one was a pretty damn brilliant exit for 13th Doctor. Maybe character-wise, not the greatest, especially since the Master, played by Sacha Dhawan, spoiler alert, tries to force the Doctor to regenerate into him, and therefore he takes over as the Doctor for a short while. But then again, Hollow 13th Doctor pops in for a little bit and has a bit of fun with the companions. So, yeah. I've talked about this one recently in a recent Universals review, which you can go and check that out, as well as the recent 13th Doctor Reflections vlog on this particular episode. But so I won't spend too much time here, and nor will I spend too much time talking about the appearance of the 14th Doctor, as I believe that is a video for another time, specifying around that topic, if I ever decide to make one of those. But yeah, I thought this one was a pretty fun episode. I have not enjoyed the show as much as I had watching this episode when it aired since the 50th anniversary special, the Day of the Doctor. And yeah, this was just absolutely incredible on the first viewings, on later viewings, on reflection. The Master's plan is absolutely naff. And it makes absolutely no sense. A more streamlined version probably would have made it a bit better. I don't know if you needed the Daleks in it, although I am happy to see them here, and it would have probably worked better as a Cyber Master story, with maybe the Daleks popping in later on as a new threat to fight afterwards. Who knows? The inclusion of Ace and Tegan is nice, and they get some good stuff to do, but I guess it also means that Dan doesn't get anything to do, so he's just written out quickly early on, but respectively, like Ryan and Graham, so not the best exit, but, done nicely, respectfully to both characters and the actor, and before jumping back into more convoluted plot lines with other characters. Also, good to see Vinda back, and also, speaking of Ryan and Graham, Graham, not Ryan, but Graham, who is the best 13th Doctor companion, or at least mainly because Bradley Walsh is so lovable. But yeah, it's great to see him back, Unit back, and yeah, it's just such a big, massive fangasm of a story. It was so good. It was so fun on the first viewing, and whilst it's knocked down a little bit afterwards, it's still a pretty damn fun, brilliant episode. And like I said, one of my favourite regeneration stories. Second favourite of the new series, and then one of my favourites of the show. This was a really great way to send off the 13th Doctor's era, and after the 50-minute botched, edited, and messy Legend of the Sea Devils, at least we got a 90-minute nicely looking, if a little bit messy on the script side, centenary special, which nicely ended off the Jodie era and the Chris Chibnall era nicely. However, my favourite of this trilogy of specials, and one of my favourite episodes of Series 13 as a whole, if you count these three as part of that, is the 2022 New Year special, which is my number one spot on this ranking, Eve of the Daleks. Now, I know some people will say this is messy as well, and convoluted, and it's and all that. And to be fair, it probably is, but I just really enjoy the simplistic story. This is kind of what we needed after the CGI fest of Flux. And I'm not saying CGI isn't a good thing. It is a good thing in places, and it can create some great new worlds. But I think the 13th Doctor's era, especially in Flux, they kind of overused CG. It becomes very obvious in the face, more so than it was in the previous 10 years, when it probably didn't look as good. Heck, there's some Series 1, 2, and other RTD era episodes and that have some dated CGI, but there's also quite a lot that still holds up to this day, and it looks really good. Heck, even some of the Sylvester McCoy stories and the TV movie have a couple of effects to have aged well. Okay, maybe not so much with the McCoy episodes, but the TV movie has some really good CG that's held up. But this era has quite a lot of obvious CG that just looks very fake. Now, if this was amateur fan film stuff or a low-budgeted program, I wouldn't be slacking it so much. But this is a medium to high budget series nowadays, and with Disney Plus, it's a high budget, very high. But it just seems to be over relying on the CG so much in these eras. Again, thanks to COVID, that's probably a main factor for Flux and these episodes. But I think it needed to cut down a bit, which is why I'm thankful for Eve of the Daleks for setting it in more or less one physical location with a little bit of visual effects here and there, such as the kind of the barrier keeping them in and the massive explosion. But when it comes, and the Dalek guns, of course, but when it comes to physical stuff, then this episode feels like one of the more real episodes of the 13's era because it is set in this one location with a small band of characters and they're just going around the place in a time loop. Groundhog Day is probably what it's compared to the most, but other stuff has done this idea before where they're all kind of stuck in a time loop. What I really like about this idea is that the loop is getting smaller, that we're losing a minute each time we go round, which is a really cool and clever idea. And then there's Daleks frequently coming after them. The most we get in one loop is about 5 in the middle. It starts off with 1, then it goes to 2, then 3, and then there's one there where there's 5, and then go back to like 2 or 3 as we carry on down the line. But yeah, I mean, they would have probably only used 3 props anyway. But yeah, it's a nice little story. The only kind of real letdown for me is the Nick and Sarah character stuff. Whilst there's some nice bits in there, I think it could have been written slightly better. Like, if Nick has this crush on Sarah, then why does he only come back every New Year's Eve? He knows she's going to be there every New Year's Eve, but he could still maybe pop in other days of the year and probably expect to see her there. Maybe he's just there. If he's their only customer, he could still be like a regular. At least it would make sense for them to stay open at all. Not just because they've got one person still hanging out there, but one person coming back regularly even. And if Nick has a thing for Sarah, why does he keep somehow managing to secure girlfriends elsewhere? Why does he have other girlfriends if he likes Sarah? I can understand him distancing himself because he's got an embarrassing crush. He's a bit nervous about it. He may even have a mental disability that's preventing him which prevents him getting rid of the stuff. Sentimental value. I know I've certainly got something like that, and I'm called Nick, so we've got a bit in common, and that's why he can't really go and speak to her because he's shy. But how come he's dating other women if A, he's got a crush for Sarah, and B, he's nervous about approaching her about it, and C, they leave their stuff behind and they don't come back and ask about it, so he just leaves it here. I think the whole thing about the two of them being here could have been handled a little bit better, and also the episode's like, oh, why are these two being targeted by the Daleks, and why here? Well, they probably just locked onto the TARDIS and detected the Doctor and Dan, so they just went to kill her, and they just killed these other two because they just happened to be here. That's my theory, because there isn't really a proper explanation. Other than those queries, this is a brilliant episode, a brilliant New Year's special, one of my favourite Dalek episodes, one of my favourites from Jodie's era and Series 13, and just an absolute fun time. It is a little convoluted in places. Well, this is Chibnall post Series 11, so what a surprise. And it deals with wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. If Moffat, heck, even RTD was writing this episode, it'd probably just be as complicated. I think this is actually one of the easier episodes to follow once you know what's going on. Like, when you rewatch the episodes, it's slightly easier to follow. So yeah, I like Eve of the Daleks. I think it's a really great episode. And that brings me to the end of this ranking. But before we go, a quick reminder and recap. Number 3 was The Legend of the Sea Devils. Number 2, The Power of the Doctor. And number 1, Eve of the Daleks. The 2022 Easter, BBC Centenary, and 2022 New Year specials of Doctor Who. Boom, done. We did it. That's it. That's every single 13th Doctor story reviewed and ranked, apart from the big top 10 ranking coming up next. One thing before we go, I've noticed something interesting with fan reception of these episodes. The fans who really like Flux, like the majority of the series as a whole, Yeah, if the ones where they would say this is one of the strongest series of the revived series, or at the very least, of the Jodie era. Um, so ones that will say this is a really great series would then say that the specials as a mini series, the episodes themselves weren't really good and were some of the weaker episodes. But ones that are not so fond of Flux are actually slightly more nicer to these specials. And I think I kind of fall into that category. As with Flux, apart from episodes 2 and 4, I found that most of it was good at best and meh at worst, with a couple of notable bad points as well feeding into those episodes, except War of the Sontarans and Village of the Angels, which were bloody brilliant. Whilst the 2022 specials, I thought either the Daleks and Power of the Doctor were bloody brilliant, but Legend of the Sea Devils was not. So I'm kind of in that camp. Then again, there's people who enjoy episodes from both of these and would gladly say that both are equally as good. And there are fans who would say the same about them being bad, so they would say they're equally as bad. So yeah, but I just noticed that some people who really like Flux not so keen on the specials, and some people who aren't so keen on Flux really like the specials. I've just noticed that with some people. But yeah, I personally think the specials are slightly stronger than Flux if we were boiling it down, but that's mainly because I like 2 out of the 3 episodes in this series, this mini series. Whilst with Flux, I thought 2 out of the 6 were really good, and then the other 4 and 1 in this came down between meh to good. So I think I'm leaning towards liking the specials more than the full series itself. But then again, that's mainly due to the fact that Flux didn't really tie up all 6 episodes that brilliantly either. So yeah, at least even if Power of the Doctor doesn't really tie up 13's character or her arcs that amazingly, it's still at least a good send off for her. And same with Evie the Daleks, not Legend of the Sea Devils, sadly. And with that, that is the 13th Doctor's era over. We've just got one more top 10 ranking to go, and then that's her tenure done. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.